I'm from Wayne State University, PhD student there. And this is Scaling Up Media Analysis and Transmedia Experience. Today we have two presenters. One is Virginia Kuhn, who's on the faculty at the USC School of Ceramic Arts over there. And
or cinematic.
Cinematic?
It's becoming more haptic all the time.
I thought it said ceramic arts. Whatever, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm going to go back to spelling class in the first grade. And leading off will be Caitlin Fisher, professor at York University, director of Augmented Reality Lab, and she's associate professor of film. Dr. Kuhn, secondly, I guess I'm going backwards today. Professor Kuhn has a project demo centered on VAT, video analysis tableaus, that is making large-scale video archives accessible to researchers. And Professor Fisher will present Cardamom of the Dead Virtual Reality Storytelling for Oculus Rift.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So I'm Caitlin. And maybe that's not exactly what I'm going to do, because I'm thrilled to be here with Virginia. And I know this project, and I love the idea of working with big data and scaling up our work. And I hate to disappoint you, because in part, I had applied to do a demo, which would have meant bringing the Oculus Rift project and having people test it. In an environment like this, bringing the demo, I don't know what it would look like in this room, like 30 of you all coming for like a 2-minute demo. And if I do a full walkthrough of it, it will make you sick. So this is actually an interesting structuring thing, because what does it mean to have these intermediary media forms where the runtime for Cardamom of the Dead, it actually is a transmedia piece, because it existed in augmented reality. We've done it on different kinds of cards. I've had different iterations of it. In this particular iteration, you could really have a 2-hour runtime. But on version 1 of Oculus Rift, after about 6 minutes, people would become sick. So I took this as this kind of cipher, being on the panel with Virginia and the title Scaling Up. I hate to disappoint anybody. I will demo, I will do a bit of a walkthrough, but I also took it as a challenge to think about how changing and emerging technologies have scaled up my work. And it was a wonderful invitation to think about my practice and about scale, and working both in very large scale data sets and working in the miniature, which is something I've typically done. So it's a tiny show and tell that I think I want to start actually showing how most of my works were very small, and how this occasion, the conference has given me the occasion to think about why, and how we're going vast again, and what working in the vast canvas of the Unity game engine narrative has done, and then finish up a little bit with where I see my future work going with Meta Space Glass and some really vast mobile narratives. So I hope you'll indulge me a tiny bit. This is totally impractical for a room this size, but I thought I'd pass around a tiny show and tell, and for people for whom it doesn't reach, this is the other kind of work I do, tiny, miniature. You won't really be able to see it here, but so this is kind of a storybook narrative in augmented reality using computer vision techniques, and so it becomes the living book. I'll pass this around. So part of it is what you're seeing there is like a screen capture for some of this, and I guess we could just leave the volume slightly on. So I wanted you to think about the miniature at the same time as you imagine the infinite landscape of the Oculus. Yeah, so for people who never get it, you could just see, imagine. All right, so.
What's talking like?
Oh, okay. Well, this is sort of a classic AR, after kind of the first generation of AR in the computer vision field. So this is kind of the small consumer AR, where there had been formerly markers or barcode-looking objects that would track. So the camera is seeing these, and this is natural feature detection. And then in the Unity game engine with the Vuforia plugin, you can add audio and 3D and video. So every book can become a living book, every tattoo a living tattoo, every painting a living painting. And it's very interesting because the first consumer, and this is also part of scale, and this is one of the things I want to get to, the HCI of this is pretty terrible. But the magical possibilities of the technology is very cool. So one of the limitations and one of the reasons it's small and one of the reasons it's not that successful yet, but is poised to become, I guess, what it, it changes day by day, but like $100 billion industry or something, is because this is still intermediary and crappy. but the imaginative possibilities are kind of endless. So that's what I'm kind of passing around. So this was built in the AR lab with, okay. So here we go. So here's our lab. We're kind of like a classic STEAM lab, so largely working between my appointment is in the Faculty of Fine Arts, but working a lot with computer science and engineering and the fine and performing arts and writing and screenwriting. And we do a lot of immersive things, and we do small scale. There's another screenshot if you're not getting that yet, just the books that come up and also just the idea of tiny things that move. And there's a larger story of why we ended up with the miniature, and anybody who works in a university and has waited for a renovation understands that our large goal of working always in the immersive space was delayed by about 2 years, and it set our work off on an entirely other trajectory towards computer vision-based AR that looked like a horrible detour but was this incredible learning experience and changed the work of our lab. So that's the piece that's passing around right there, just in case if you never see it at the back. So this was called 200 Castles, Interlocking Augmented Reality Stories of Longing, Archiving Sex, Regret, and Wounds. And it's very interesting, like this was actually prepared as very much a book object because it was shown for the Bibliothèque Nationale. So when you think of like different audiences and different kinds of literacies and what people are prepared to look at, initially this was going to be just like one marker and a 3D castle pops up and you could access it by touch, and nobody could do it. Nobody could hold it and access it and figure out how to do it. So again, intermediary forms where I think our thoughts are outstripping our tools. So this is what I was led to think about when I was put on the scaling up. This was kind of me in grad school. These were always my notes. And so when hypertext came, I was like, yes, vast. And everything got bigger, right? So you're thinking about, okay, so this is for me, this is the 90s, and everything is big, and everything is like possible, and everything goes vast. And those of us who were doing like miniature zines and stealing photocopies, now we had limitless canvases. There were diminishing returns, but we didn't think about that too much. Like I had pieces with 17,000 links, like, it's crazy. But as as expressive tools, what it meant for us to build like these knowledge domain visualizations or these vast hypertexts, they were amazing. And in the history of it, you have amazing places, building story space technology that was incredible. I mean, it was basically dream software built by PhDs in computer science and English, deciding if you were going to have vast hypermedia narratives, what they would look like, guard fields, how you still had pleasures of reading, how you could go big and still have emotionally important work. And then comes along Mosaic and HTML, and it tanks everything. So you had this moment of incredible possibility for things getting bigger and also potentially better. And then this happens. So this is kind of the moment where I start teaching. Go from things, the 17,000 links, these vast potentials, these constellations, these knowledge domain visualizations, these potential for like these books without end. And then we get like Flash, then we get the timeline, then we get students who, and it becomes very tricky to work. The granularity of work starts to shrink. Most of my students at this time start to work in Flash. This is, say, like in the early 2000s, and work goes tiny. And I always like, wow, why is the scale so small? And then also, this is what my lab looks like. We get these big spaces, and none of us have been taught to work in space. None of the people with my formation. So I'm like, now I need more people with theater, with circus arts, with sound, but that wasn't me. We start to imagine larger works in mobile. And this is one of the most hideous things that happens to those of us who live in cold climates. Between the changing sunlight, the horrible HCI, these were even those, before there were tablets, these were those modded power books you could buy. They weighed 400 pounds. Anytime I'm an external for a mobile media piece, I'm like, please tell me it's not going to be 30 nodes across a football field. I'm like, make it small. Like, can I do it on the desktop? Do I really have to go? So it was really interesting. I think there were a number of then reasons. What I'm arguing is that part of what happens is that the tools are intermediary, the HCI is terrible, the potential for vast narratives is kind of bracketed, and we end up, for all sorts of good reasons, to have the granularity is smaller and smaller, and the stories are quite impoverished. They don't have actually very much dramatic potential. We don't give them much time, and in many ways they don't deserve a whole lot of time. This is my campus. Students give me this and I'm like, oh, it's January. I'm gonna walk out and try to find 11 story nodes in winter, in North York, in Toronto. And then the augmented reality thing makes it, one bit of sunlight, one shadow, one leaf crossing the, so So I guess what I'm thinking is, we're imagining all these better stories, but we don't have these tools yet. So coming back just a little bit, and I think the other piece is still circulating. So a lot of the things I end up doing are like small talking collections. If I wanted to go bigger or have longer stories, I started to miniaturize, rather than making people run, and this sort of goes against the trend of where this will be, but small. Tiny, reworked pop-up books, and just sort of found objects. Looking at I would go in and buy small children's pop-up theaters at gift shops and make those into small story worlds. Later, with slightly better technology, using lots of haunted objects and making people walk through them, making everything sort of come to life like that. And it seemed to satisfy in part the idea that we could have story worlds that were manageable, where the HCI wasn't terrible. And you notice it's the iPad here. I came kicking and screaming to the iPad. I really don't like this. We have a lot of excellent head-mounted displays. But it was a way of getting work out, and not so much my work, because I didn't care that significantly, but student work out of the lab and into the App Store and making it available. But this is actually a much better experience when you're not holding this, when you actually have your head-mounted display on and are holding the object. So I'm getting to that. We did a lot of miniature story worlds with poems. We did documentary stuff. We had a long-standing project on untold stories of the Underground Railroad that we had like both in large immersive spaces and small handheld. We recreated sort of important, buildings and multi-cinema exhibitions. We did do drag and drop software to sort of reimagine caves and try to make this easy, sort of expressive tools to make things big again, but it really didn't work all that well. We started to do, especially when Unity took off, we stopped building our own software and we did a lot of work in Unity. We had no comparative advantage in our own software development anymore, although we still use it for pre-visualization. But this was really the disappointing thing. We would, work in, this is a piece that we did for a pioneer village called Mother Home Heaven. But this was still the method of interacting with it. And in part it was also practical because, we couldn't leave really expensive head-mounted displays in exhibition contexts where there would be hundreds of people going through. These are also all horribly tethered. So in all of this period, I really think I've spent the past decade trying to get back to my early things I thought about as a doctoral student. Okay, so for that, so one of the things that I'll also just say quickly about myself is that I'm a horrible hoarder. I actually am an excellent hoarder. People would disagree. And a lot of my projects have used sort of in that classic, I guess both in a hoarding sense and a classic sort of feminist maneuver and a classic, the collection of all your ephemera and all of your stuff. And you can see my preoccupation with haunted objects and with small book objects. But also I save everything, I scan everything, I put in all these personal, there are always mysteries and clues, there are always like emails sent. And then I realized that a lot of the things I had were objects where everybody was dead, everybody had died, all the musical thing I was using were like composers who'd recently died. So I thought I'd call one of the iterations of Cardamom of the Dead, sort of everybody at this party is dead. And one of the things that happened was switching, as I said, to the Unity game engine. And once you buy in, one of the reasons why we, of course, there are all sorts of good reasons, we don't have to reiterate them here, about why you resist going with one commercial game engine. And of course, we're all, machines are working on our thoughts in particular ways. We wanted to be platform agnostic. We wanted to have lots of different software. We wanted to learn through building our own. Nevertheless, at a certain point, when millions of dollars go into development of a tool with an incredible physics engine, and in my case, I can throw it up to the trackers, I can build an app, third-party people were releasing plugins that could make it an augmented reality experience. It hit every point on our wish list. So we bought in, and we've been doing a lot of development within Unity. And the experience of that, of course, is all of a sudden you're working in a vast canvas again. And even though I was doing, and the piece that's passing right now, is another miniaturized story world, which is absolutely possible to continue the same work I was doing with Unity and an AR plugin. It also brought me back to the fun of the early days of the cave. What if you just kept walking? What if it's filled with like every bit of the dead? So the structuring device for this piece that actually has, you could probably wander in it for 2 hours if it didn't make you sick, which means you wander in it for 4 minutes. The structuring device was a tape I found at my 21st birthday party, and I thought if not everybody in it is dead, almost everybody named here is dead. So this is how we start. And what for people who came in late, I said I didn't bring the Oculus knowing that this was somehow a talk instead of a demo, and I didn't know how I would show it to you. So I'm just going to.
We have a birthday party. She will be 21. Charles has the cat. Jody is here.
Sorry there isn't better sound here, but they don't have speakers. So it's just this giant world, and we just kept putting rooms in it. So I think at this point, this is a slightly earlier version, but at this point there are like 50 rooms and growing, and they're hyperlinked in interesting ways. And this is my 21st birthday, and everybody named here is now.
It's already living. It's so mad.
I'll just let it run for 3 or 4 minutes, and you can imagine, of course, this is like a fully VR environment, so you could walk anywhere and you can experience it as many times as you like. And we realized early on that it was impossible to tell where you've been or what you've done, so that's how the hanging things are. They just signal whether you've been to a particular story world. So I'll just let it run sort of for 3 minutes, and then you can imagine. So this has interlocking stories. One is sort of this developmental coming-of-age story. One is the story of a murder, and the other is a story of kind of like euthanasia and stories of being buried alive. And there's always the story of hoarding.
Heloise carries them everywhere now. It's only 6 years worth, but it's a start. She'll FTP all Ernestine's files off the computer when she has time soon. She touches each page like a relic and reads without concentration, trying to force Ernestine's voice into her head, a conversation, the one she's avoiding.
So then these are they can be hyperlinked back to the main world and you travel again, or you can find a door that hyperlinks that's an associative link with a different part of these 3 interlocking stories. And what I realized in the making of it, I was like, wow, the stories really come together, and then everybody's going to read these small email fragments, and of course nobody does that. So another part of the theme of a lot of this work is the power of these as expressive tools, I think, rather than the power of these as actually finding audience right at this moment. I'll just let it go a little bit, since for people who are here actually for a demo.
Collecting is the family curse. I had a grandfather who dabbled in meta invention, making machines that made other machines, thousands of motors. Everything was always whirring in our cellar. We must have been the only family on the block to store radium. You never know when it might have come to the family's rescue. But these small gray boxes, thickly lined, weren't even filled to capacity. The locks still locked and the hinges failed.
I also like the idea of playing with these like vast narratives and emerging technology with these tiny family stories.
She could not stop crying. All this. She feels warm, sunbeams.
This is also where you figured out that the Oculus Rift is really a second-person porn
sneaking underneath the scarf tied around her eyes. Tight, soft cotton, smelling of his cologne. Don't move. Damn him, that voice. Make me. She writhes against the sheets and gently arches her back, moves to bring her hands to her nipples to drive him crazy, but also just to show. Below the tight knot of the scarf, curls tumble loose across her shoulders, and she rubs her hair back and forth across the pillow. He likes that, and oh, she feels him watching, warmer than the morning light. No touching, love, just me. Only her legs are covered by the cotton bed sheet, and he starts pulling it down so slowly, forcing her lead into an impossible rhythm. She's breathing fast. That's me in grade 9, affecting a windswept and worried retro look. Not that I didn't want to be pretty. If pretty happened, all the better. I just didn't have much of a clue about boys. Certainly not high school boys. Men, sure. I knew why they watched me. Had a sense of the currency of being younger and a girl with knowing eyes. But high school boys? My romantic connections were like science experiments, an A student but perfunctory, lab notes with neat handwriting and an eye to the grade. My encounters with girls cautious, handling nitroglycerin, the extra credit assignment you stay up all night to do, combining acids and acids, making small, clean monsters very...
Okay, I think I stopped there. Okay, so that could have like a runtime of about 2 hours. I was saying, most people actually were able to only get to a few spaces before the technology itself would make you quite sick. But here's the other way it's going. So here's one of my students with the Google Glass on, Helen. when the next generation technology of augmented reality started to hit, and imagining better access to consumer-grade head-mounted displays, we started to think about going big again. And of course, this is in the context of people binge watching 40 hours of Netflix and 30 hours in a game world. So the question becomes, if the technology is good enough, why won't we have these large stories? Why wouldn't we have, really vast dreamscapes? And to that end, so I think I'll just kind of end here that where I want to go with going big again isn't so much into these small VR spaces, isn't into waiting that, but is into imagining again an augmented reality where the physical world is co-constitutive with the story world, that it would be persistent and real-time, collaborative. And this is now possible. We're still in the intermediate forum, but I've got a collaboration right now with Steve Mann, who's really a genius. And I'm loving working with Metaspace Glass, because not only can you sit back as an audience member and receive these narratives, and you're sitting down, but you can build within them. We can be networked. I can build something sculptural and I can send it to you. These become the beginning of science fiction stories that almost start to write themselves. This is part of the meta demo, but just to show you how you can be collaborating in these spaces. These are the slightly loud, and I was going to talk over it, but I think part of what I like about it, and of course that's how all of the concept videos go, right? We're going to use it to find out people's personal information. But once you have technology where you could walk through the world, where the story could be there, where it could be served up, where these are collaborative spaces, this is part of, in spite of all that video, Steve Mann's very interested in the idea that these are also devices for looking back. He's got a big thing we do on being able to visualize valence fields, so being able to see people seeing us, see cameras seeing us. And there are a lot of opportunities to go vast again. So over the next 4 years, working with Metaspace Glass to imagine, once again, the thousands of associative links, the cinematic dreamscape that would be persistent on the real world, story worlds that we could wander in for potentially days instead of 4 minutes like a gallery object. So I guess this has been a real invitation for me to think at scale about what it meant for a lot of this work to look like concept art, and that everybody was going to look at it for 60 seconds, and that I see us on the cusp again of giant, of much larger projects that I think will hit the sweet spot of many people's translatable skills, and at least will be well worth exploring. So thank you very much. I'm going to end there.
Great.
All right. And is my little book still circulating or gone? Oh, okay, it's back.
I haven't seen these.
It hasn't
Oh,
made
okay.
it up
All right.
yet.
No, I just. Okay. Wow. Did you? Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. It should just be able to swap it.
So thank you, Caitlin, for going first, because I just came from a different panel, so from being in a different panel, so it just
Took a moment. I'm just going to stop here so I can see.
let's see if we've got my mirroring on. So evidently not, or we're just taking a minute here. There we go. Well, it's not actually mirroring. So I actually am, there we go. Okay, great. So I'm actually going to, it's the same thing, I had, this was to be a demo of my video analysis tableau, which I will show for sure, but also, like Caitlin, we talked about this. We thought we were doing a demo, and then I think it worked out nicely to put us together. We were really delighted to find that out, but it kind of shifts the nature of these things. So I'm going to show 2 projects, and hopefully one has slightly more resonance with the work that Caitlin's doing, and hopefully, it'll prove an interesting approach. And then we'll actually leave a little bit more time than I think is in the schedule for discussion, because really, I think it's so often the case that it's the discussions that are really useful and helpful or enlightening, at least on my end. So. I'm going to, first of all, I want to talk a little bit about a theoretical framework for this kind of work, for the work that well, I should mention that I'm not with the School of Ceramic Arts, although now I'm thinking I want to be with the School of Ceramic Arts.
I need new glasses.
Yeah, no. As do I, but it's funny, I could have very well written that, but I didn't. But we are actually quite a large school, the USC School of Cinematic Arts. So we have 7 divisions, and a couple of my colleagues are here, which is so wonderful. But so ours is the newest division called Media Arts and Practice. So we're made up of people that kind of sample from all 7 divisions, from animation, from interactive media and games, from critical studies with the theoretical framework. So I'm going to open with just this notion of grounded cognition. The work that we do at the Media Arts and Practice Division is digital by nature, natively digital, and all of the courses we teach are theory and practice models. The scholarship that most of us do and the research is equally kind of a theory practice. So, and also kind of infused with things like social activism and social equity. So late, most of the work that has been produced by us and out of our classes has been in the screen, been perhaps web-based in interesting ways, but we're really exceeding the screen these days. We're doing a lot more with touch-based and gestural and a little bit of AR and some Oculus stuff. So I'm going to open with kind of the theoretical framework for that, which is grounded cognition, and which again has been around for a little bit. And according to the grounded cognition researchers, any given time that people perceive a situation around them and formulate a conceptualization of the situation, they're actually using more than just their brains. Obviously, the notion of grounded cognition is that, in fact, in this world where life is quite complicated, if you experience something physically, you are more likely to remember it, to have a kind of, it impacts your sensory experience all over. So with that, I look to the work of Paul Humphreys, who has a book called Extending Ourselves, and it's the ways in which his notion is that we make tools to extend human capacities in 3 different ways: through extrapolation, through conversion, and through augmentation. And I'll just do 3 quick examples of that. So extrapolation means you extend extend an existing modality. So for example, if you have vision, you want to see further and wider. You want to see around corners. You want to see the microscopic as well as the macroscopic. That's an example. The notion of conversion is that it's phenomena that's accessible to one sensory modality, and then we convert it. So the visual display of sonic information would qualify as that. And then finally, augmentation, which is something that is not perceptible that we actually make perceptible. There's any number of examples of this, but I think magnetism is one kind of good way. We can't really sense it in the world, but we can pick it up with the instruments that we create. So with these kind of notions in mind of grounded cognition and of the extending ourselves, this project called the LibViz project took shape. And we're in the prototype stage, and we have actually pretty good news that we're going to find out pretty soon about knock wood, about the funding. We've been asked to redo some of our approach, and it looks pretty good for us. But I just wanted to put this slide up with all of my colleagues on it, because I think none of these projects ever are done alone. Like Caitlin said, these are, I think too often in humanistic inquiry, we've been really wedded to that notion, again, this is old news, of the single scholar doing this monograph, the single person work, and almost nothing I do is single anymore. You know, there's just I feel like the scholarship we're doing and the inquiries are so complex that you really need specialists. So there's actually more of us involved in this project, but these are the main people. And Andreas Kratky is a colleague of mine who does amazing, interesting work. He's also in the School of Cinema. And then Sue Lufshin and Michaela Ullman are special collections librarians who have been kind of supporting this project. So what is the LibViz? Well, it's a gestural interface. So we, when we became a division 2 years ago, we have this brand new building that is the interactive building, and it's for our division and the Division of Media Arts, Interactive Media and Games Division. And so we're kind of the most wired and the heavy technological building on the campus, and yet, as happens, things aren't always working exactly the way they're supposed to. So what happened is we have this lobby with these massive screens. And they are able to, some of them are touch-based and some of them have depth cameras, and we can do this interesting work. So with that, with this lobby, we realized we needed to start designing projects for the lobby. So this is one of the early projects, and this is just a small example of the interface. So what happens is, and again, this is designed in the Unity game engine. So there's these massive screens, and they have depth cameras. And when you walk past, the interface is a whirlwind. So this is kind of a fairly lame example of what a whirlwind would look like. And this is the back end of the Unity platform. So the notion is you walk up to the screen. As you're walking by, the whirlwind starts. As you approach it, it slows down and it stops, inviting you into the space and inviting you to touch and move, search around. So again, kind of an odd prototype. This is a smaller screen, but this is the notion. So then you can stop the interface from whirling, and you can start searching by things that look similar. So you put in a keyword, and you look at the selection of books that come up, and then you make your choices based on that. So we're using haptics, we're using gesture, and trying to kind of reinvigorate interest in the library in that way. And also get rid of a little bit of the abstraction that has come to pass with the Dewey Decimal System. So what books would be the ultimate prototype for this? Well, we decided to take this collection of artist books. And so they're because they really lend themselves to this kind of interface and to a representation digitally that is a teaser. It doesn't reproduce the whole, but it is a teaser to do a couple of different things. Number one, to let people know about the richness and the vastness of library holdings. I mean, they have bones, they have just this 300 of these artist books, each of which is really interesting in its own right. There are boxes with sniff, with a series of scents that are sniffable. We still can't figure out how to reproduce that, so that's one that we kind of put aside. So we took a selection of these books, the ones that seem to lend themselves to some kind of representation in a touch-based shape. So these are two of the kind of cool ones to show. The next question we had to ask ourselves is, how do we represent that without completely duplicating it in digital space? Because again, keep in mind, the notion of this is to reinvigorate interest in the library and to give people a teaser of what they can find if they actually visit. These artist books tend to be locked away. They're not easily accessible, and therefore no one knows really that they're there. And if they do know they're there, they're going to look at an abstraction of its metadata and never see the kind of richness of this. So these are two that we took, and hopefully this is going to work. We did stop motion to represent a little bit of this book, and it's a coffin book, and you can see we started making the book kind of open by itself, and you'll see in just a moment. Here we go. you get each page of it actually will come up that way. If you can see, I didn't cut out completely. You can see our hands as we're, using fishing wire to actually make this thing work. It's funny, I have a picture that I didn't include here of all of us getting ready for a day of shooting these pieces, and we have like C-stands and cameras, and there's 4 of us carrying these massive instruments, and it's like, this is the materiality of making digital objects. It's just incredible. And the other kind of really interesting issue is that these artist books are, and again, just talking about the logistics of trying to make this thing happen, the artist books are something that the library doesn't like to leave the library. So where are you going to shoot and film all this stuff? It's really an interesting situation. So for the most part, we have to go into the library at off hours and kind of bring all of our tools and do this work. But we do also have this division that is about 15 miles away in Marina del Rey called the ICT. It's the Institute of Creative Technologies. And there they have all the cutting edge work and this. So I finally convinced them to let me take a selection of these books. There's a 3D scanner that I'm going to actually show you in its use that is just they're prototyping in this lab. And so several of the books seem to lend themselves to kind of the 3D modeling. But, and that sounds really easy and really interesting, however, so this is a copy of the scanner, and I apologize for the bad image. You really can't get very good images of it. So this is this crazy scanner that scans always, and I'm going to turn that sound down because it's just stills coming up. But you can see in the middle here is the object, and then the scanner scans it in different ways. And it takes about 45 minutes to scan each book and then to render. So there's a couple of things of note that I really wanted to show this image of, because the powers that be, they wonder why we need funding for this kind of thing when it takes, I spent a whole day there just trying to scan 5 books. And you can see the wind, so this arm goes around, and it's, you can't have anything that's going to flutter in the wind. You can't have anything that's like big. So that kind of 3D scanning we have only done for kind of 1 or 2 projects.
Who built it?
I'm sorry?
Who built that scanner?
That is done, it was our people in our Institute for Creative Technologies, and oddly enough, this was funded by a sunglass company. Yeah. Talk about repurposing. So they wanted, I think it was Ray-Ban. So you can see that it's quite small. They're building these all over. There's one in Germany right now that's really, really interesting, and it kind of works on a conveyor belt model where the scan happens as it's going through. But again, that technology is pretty difficult to get a hold of. So.
Well, did you hear about DIY book scanner?
I do know, yeah. But that won't do what we do for this. So this is 3D modeling of all aspects of the book. So the DIY book scanning is really about converting,
to PDF.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and PDF doesn't work.
This is really the experience, but digitally.
Right.
The book.
Right, exactly. And that's why we chose the artist books, because, in some ways, many codex-based books are, you can make them digital and without that much shift. I mean, there would be no reason to go to the library if you had a PDF of a book that's just a book, that is mostly words on a page. And so the decision was very deliberate to make this things that A, you don't know is there, and B, that lend themselves to kind of a different representation. Again, with each case, though, we had to ask ourselves, like, how much of the book do we reproduce? Because if we make it too good, you have this great experience and it's touch-based, why are you going to bother going to the library? And there's all kinds of things at play, including really fair use and copyright things. I mean, should we just absolutely have this complete facsimile of it in this space? So those were considerations. I want to show one last little overview that we did of this is a flower book. Again, it lends itself a little bit to stop motion. But this, you know, we're pretty much almost reproducing the book here. It's kind of close to the original. I mean, there's still something about the tactile quality of having it and opening it that's really interesting. But given all the barriers that are put up to actually get at these things, you know, we're not sure. Like, I'm not sure if I would bother going through all the paces that I have to get at this book. Again, the steps in the workflow are pretty interesting from here, because not only do we have to kind of take all of these individual books and kind of figure out the best way to make them have some form of digitization, then we have to load them into the Unity game engine, and then we're hoping we have a prototype of that is working on the large screen, and then the next step we're hoping to achieve is to do it for mobile as well. So have the screens be both big and small. So that is the LiveViz project, and I'm going to just spend then the next few minutes talking about the kind of main work that I've been working on for several years. That is the video analysis toolkit. And for that, I'm going to just jump into a different screen here, and I'll talk a little bit about novel visualization, but mostly just this project itself. So this, again, large, it's a large team at work on this, and this is why I put it up here, one of whom's in the audience, my co-PA, Michael Simeone here. But the video analysis toolkit tableau was called for a long time the LSVA, the Large Scale Video Analytics Project, which people kept telling us you really got to get a better name, right? And so we actually spent a little time thinking about that. But the notion behind the VAT is that we have vast filmic archives, and there's more being made every day, and we have no way to really subject these to research in any sustained way. When it's a time-based medium, and when there's more video generated, you know, what, in an hour, they say, than one could ever view in a lifetime. And we know the impacts of visual media on notions of identity formation and all kinds of things. We need to analyze it. We need to be able to bring it into some kind of form that we can actually hold it up to sustained inquiry. So the project is supported by the NSF's EXCEED program, which stands for Extreme Science and Engineering Discovery Environment. And we're really happy to get one of the allocations on the Gordon supercomputer, which was the first flash memory supercomputer in the world for a while. It's since then being replaced by some other things. But if you think of like a massive thumb drive, that's what this thing is. And you know, for the first time, it kind of allowed us in real time to crunch vast filmic data, because, you know, the cloud architecture just hasn't kept up with the kind of the improvements in GPUs. You know, if you think about YouTube is a great example, it didn't exist until 10 years ago. You know, it was just really, really hard to put images online in any kind of sustained way. I mean, I don't know, you know, we're all swimming in it, so we forget that in the late 90s, you had a digital picture, and, you know, it would take like a million years to pop up on your screen. You know, it would come down like this. So to think, you know, fast forward, you know, less than a decade, and we've got massive video archives all over the place. It's a pretty incredible kind of evolution in some ways. But while the processes for recording images have just risen and they've been automated, the processes for analyzing them have not been. So our notion was that we needed some form of both both machine reading and computer vision algorithms, and then also the human interpretive models, because obviously computers don't see context. You know, they have a really hard time with object recognition. No single algorithm really does a great job. And you know, interestingly, and I keep wondering about this, so you know, I don't know if any of you are familiar with facial recognition software, but it works pretty well when you have a full-on face, but any iteration of that, it's really hard to pick up. And almost every facial recognition software or algorithm picks up cats misidentifies humans as cats. I've always wondered why that is, and we have a whole team of computer vision specialists that work on this. And I always wonder, is it that the bone structure of a cat is similar, or that the internet is full of cats? I'm going to leave that with you, because that's kind of an interesting thing. So in any case, we started this project, and it's myself and then Alan Craig, who is really an amazing scholar who does a lot of AR work and early work with the cave. And then, as I said, Michael Simeone, who's here in the audience. And then several computer vision scientists and supercomputing scientists from several of the supercomputing centers across the country. And what we have cobbled together is excuse me, that's not the overview. We have a web-based project that will apply, and excuse the text here, I just didn't know, I thought we didn't have sound, so I did one of this. So what we did is apply 17 different algorithms and then the ability to crowdsource tagging to start bringing these things under control. So this is an example of a piece of video that you would have. I'm going to actually stop this, excuse me just a minute. I want to back it up just a tiny bit to show where we're actually, we have a database that was called Medici for years and is now called Clowder, which, speaking of cats, anyone know what a clowder is? It's a herd of cats. Isn't that crazy? Yeah, a clowder of cats. Who knew that? I knew a murder of crows, but
Wow.
didn't know.
Congress of baboons.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Is it Congress? Yeah. All right. I am with the School of Ceramic Arts. I'm just going to change that. So what happens, and I just hesitate to show it live because you're never quite sure what's going to work. So this is kind of a pre-recorded screencast that is not serving me well at this moment. Okay, yeah, so we'll get through this text in just a second. This is embarrassing to do, especially when we're kind of live here. But so we have the back-end architecture is supercomputing. The front end is a more a database that or an interface that is actually easier to kind of manage. And I'm fairly geeked, but even for me, the back-end architecture and the early kind of middleware that the supercomputing specialists were doing was really difficult to navigate. So part of this project really rests on the fact that we have this Medici or now Clowder interface that is a little bit easier to handle. So when you, what happens is when you upload video into the system, we apply 4 extractors to it that cut it up, that sense and these are all done with machine reading. So you sense movement in segments, and that perhaps is a new scene, and it cuts it up into segments. It creates a small preview video using popcorn, actually, just kind of where that will show you the preview. And then there's 2 others that just have it kind of pre-processed. What happens with that pre-processing, it really allows kind of a more on-demand interaction. So what you can do then is, and I apologize, but I really will show what the video looks like. It's actually on top here. This is scrolling down. When you choose a video, you can see all of its different sections. And then if you click similar here, you will see the results of the search query based on each algorithm that we're applying. So each computer vision algorithm. So some of them are really straightforward, and you go, oh yeah, that's, so you can see here they're really interesting, and if they're what you would expect, and you just, you tell it which kind of group to query, and it can look across these different queries. Some of them, it's obvious, it's what you would see here. I'm clicking on similar again, and I'll get the different results based on which kind of algorithm is being applied. And one of the things I just want to call your attention to here is these numbers. So, and there's duplicates, which we've since purged from the system. But the number is actually the information that you get. Okay, I'll be quicker than that actually, so we can have a little bit of discussion. The information you get is not only which algorithm has returned this result, but also the distance. So this number is the distance of the query frame to the frame that is returned. That is really important. We felt so strongly about that because we feel like that's a pedagogical component. So I think far too often, say Google has been so mysterious about its algorithms. We don't know why we're getting the result that we do, and often it's not good results. So we wanted to have this component wherein if a humanities scholar or someone that is less technical in nature were going to use the system, they would understand not only how to use it in an easy way, but how do we straddle that? How do we make them not have to code everything, but still understand the algorithm or get some sort of algorithmic literacy? And the way that we could think of to do that is actually telling you why you get the results. Like this, you know, upon calculation, this is this far away, and the first results will be closest, and the last results will be, you know, obviously farther away. You get that for each algorithm. Right now, it's we need to tighten that up a little bit, but again, and represent that distance in some interesting way that will make sense immediately upon seeing it. But it's there at least, you know, and then some of the results that you get, you understand exactly why you've gotten them, but some of them are not so clear. And so what happens is that the system is actually reading these films in a way that human eyes don't always do. So the best examples that I can give of this are, and actually I see Kathy Davidson here. This is, you know, in her book. Now you see it, starting out the book, she talks about inattentional blindness, and you know that famous video where everyone's doing basketballs and people are told to count the number of baskets that one team makes, right? And this gorilla walks through, and almost everyone doesn't see it on their first viewing. It's amazing that you can actually not see this video, this gorilla walking through. Well, of course, sustained analysis, reviewing the video, you absolutely see it. But it just goes to show the differences between human vision and computer vision. Now, a computer would see the gorilla. There's no way it can't see the gorilla. And so, you know, while computers in some ways are quite stupid, they don't recognize context, and they'll return results that are kind of crazy, in some ways they're actually filling in those gaps that human sight doesn't always do. So the point is that we need both. You know, we need both forms of analysis to really make sense of these archives. We know that when we see things, the Gina Davis Institute on Gender has shown, with my colleague Stacy Smith's research, that, you know, all young girls, for instance, have to do is see someone that looks like them doing something, some professional job, and they're far more likely to actually do that job or to aspire to that job. So we know these impacts are hitting us on the level that is sometimes below the threshold of consciousness, but they still have huge impacts. So, which is only to say that we need the machine reading and we need the human reading as well. And so I think, given the time, I'm going to kind of wrap up there. If anyone is further interested in the video analytics tableau, please do let me know, because we are now moving into a gateway situation where we are going to offer users, and a couple of them here, the ability to actually work with this data set as well. And yeah, I should send a sheet around too, because it is really interesting. And we're getting very, very close to having that gateway ready to use. And I will just add that the one kind of sticking point we've had so far is that we need to make it more private. So we have a collaborator in the UK that's with the Sally Potter archives. So they've given us 17 terabytes of all of the video around and the rushes and everything that made the latest feature film Ginger and Rosa. But obviously, they don't want that really, you know, they don't want other people to get at that. So what we're working to do right now is kind of make some walled gardens for people to use, but we'll have that done pretty soon. And hopefully then, with that prototype, we'll go and get funding from the NSF and take over the world.
What do you want on that sheet that people should fill?
Oh, just name and email would be great. Oh, thank you for doing that.
And if you're online, then send an email to...
Yes, V. Kuhn. I thought I put just V, K-U-H-N, at cinema, not ceramics, .usc.edu.
Okay, so I'm going to pass this around, and just if you finish
I
up
can
the
put
page,
my,
pass it back, and then we'll give it... This is the old analog way to produce
There
it.
you go. Well, that works, yeah.
Okay.
So actually, I think my email address will be right up there. So with that, I will say thank you.
I have no expertise in this. That whole video that you talked about with the gorilla, it was really men who really have the hardest time with it, I think.
Really?
Speaking as
Well,
one.
Kathy, you saw it right away, though, right?
I did, but only because I was organizing an event in which I was seeing it, so I wasn't paying attention.
Maybe
I
if
wasn't
you
counting, and I'm dyslexic, so I knew I wouldn't count. So I saw
Yeah.
it, but I failed every other attention test.
Maybe
I've
if-
taken all of them under experimental conditions. I failed just like everybody else.
Yeah.
But people, we find ADD people and people who are like level 80 gamers, really top gamers.
autistic
often
or
see-
APSI?
Yeah.
Pardon me? Yeah.
Autistic and ASB kids, all people.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Well, I hate
Autistic
to
and
say,
autistic
I
kids.
actually did see it, too.
Well, there you go. You're diagnosed.
Any condition, but if you see it once, doesn't mean you'll see it in all of the.
Right, right.
If it were a cat, though, we may have seen it.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Okay.
The cat,
Um,
the computer would see it, too.
Just my only takeaway from this as an applied translational researcher is that emails up here, people
With the
online.
EDU somehow got cut off of there.
USC.edu, right, is reality. I mean, we're not even going to get into the question of what is reality, but I think whether it's augmented reality or embodied versus grounded perceptions of reality, it's there, and the question is then to open ourselves to how to see that, perhaps. So why don't you come up, and then if we could have perhaps more of a discussion rather than questions, but I still get, they are both queens of the universe, and I'm just simply the aide de camp, and so if people want to raise a question or a comment, yes.
I love both of these, and the work you're doing is amazing. I mean, you are the queens of the universe. But you might be able to answer for me, Virginia, something I've been trying to figure out since 2005, when I taught first. It was the first time I ever taught This Is Your Brain on the Internet, and I had a group of really fabulous, smart computer scientists who were also taking a sexuality studies class, and they asked if they could write an algorithm to look through classic black and white Hollywood films, looking for. This is being live streamed, isn't it?
Oh.
I'm looking for certain body parts.
Ah.
And they found,
like TNA.
and they put together a video. There was a completely X-rated video of hidden scenes that your eye doesn't see in Fred Astaire movies. These are always, and when I've never known, and it got taken down so fast.
Yeah.
I mean, it was censored and taken down, but it was. We all saw this. It was real. Things your eyes don't see in movies were in there in those sliced in. Who put them there? I mean, one was Hayward's nipples. You know, there were male and female body parts. Is this the actors having a good time and the editors putting it in there? Where did they come from?
My suspicion is it's the editors. You know,
we're having a good time and we couldn't see it, and we're putting these Easter eggs
to amuse
in.
themselves. Yeah, absolutely. Because I know my husband did a lot of the early Disney work, and like his first job in Hollywood was publicist on the initial Tron movie, which is kind of crazy. But all of those Disney artists tended to put in, you know, there was this notion that there's all these phallic symbols and stuff, and they absolutely did that. He wrote the history of the 9 old men and all that, and they said that. They were, in some ways, and they would all have rats. They had rats on their desks.
They had pet rats because they were. It was kind of an FU to the mouse thing. Yeah. So I mean, there were all kinds of. And you know who's really interested in this project is our editing division people, the head of our editing track, because their notion is, what they told me is, you know, there's been all of this news around gender inequity in films and stuff. The New York Times came out with it last year and, you know, did this query, which again, machine reading allowed them to do to see what the differences in speaking roles between men and women were, and it was 2 to 1 last year. Which, you know, we're post-feminism, right?
Yeah.
And so, but the editing people were like, we want this. We don't understand. We never see the big scale. We're locked in our editing bays doing this, you know, working on the same film forever. We're on this microcosm. Plus, we don't know what's going to happen in post. And so for us to kind of scale back and see this larger picture is really enlightening because they don't want to be jerks. They don't want to be sexist. You know?
Aren't film editors in that one profession in the film industry that's had more women than many
yeah,
others?
Yeah, and the very first woman to get a credit above the line was an editor. Yeah, so it was a woman and was an editor, and she's the first, she just died recently, as a matter of fact. So, yeah, so that is really interesting. The other thing is, and I'll really quick, is that there's this, you know, I don't know if anyone knows, and I talked about this last year, this film Sucker Punch by Zack Snyder. It was universally hated by everyone, you know. I think it's the most crazy feminist text in the world. I actually have a chapter on this coming out. But there's this scene where Baby Doll, this avatar, you know, dances for her dinner, and what happens when she dances, we see these men ogling her, but then the camera pans around, we go into the scene of her, you know, kind of kicking ass with her sisters in this game world, and then only when their task is complete, we pan back and come back to her in real life. The feminist bloggers, well, everyone hated it, the gamers, the traditional bloggers, or traditional critics, and the feminist bloggers, but they actually thought they saw her dancing. There are published reports of her, you know, gyrating and all this. You never see it, and you don't. The eye just fills in because we are trying to fill in context. So, narrative gets filled in ways that's not really there, and the only way that you can understand that it's not there is by that sustained analysis made possible by.
I love that. Well, the other thing, just to add on to that, I mean, I love the idea actually of human beings deciding that they're going to mess with it and put in.
Well, that's true too.
But you know, I've got colleagues who work in 3D cinema, and of course, Invergence is huge. So the idea that you can in 3D cinema, the part of the new poetics, as we imagine, like the new grammar of cinema, it's actually for product placement. So instead of it being like, you know, like somebody's like idea of what's going to be hot in the corner, or like a subversive gesture, now we will be, you know, subliminally like our eyes' attention pulled towards a particular product placement, which is not nearly as fun.
And that's really, that is such an argument for this work that we're doing, because absolutely. You know advertising industry is doing
that's
it.
Where the funding is.
You know, and but so if we're not doing it, then, you know, we're really below
just the question that came out, don't our eyes, neurologically speaking, already trick us? Because don't we actually see everything upside down, and our brains change that? They say correct for it, but it changes it so everything is right side up.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, there so many visual studies scientists have talked about this, that we create our own reality and that it's our brain shaping it. I think the danger in thinking that way, that we're all seeing the same, is that then that doesn't account for difference, you know. So we have this universal viewer now whose brain thinks alike. So I think you're absolutely right, but I think we need to start getting more nuanced about that and figure out, you know, the other contextual factors that factor into not just our rods and cones, but, you know, those things. So.
Yes.
I wanted to know, for your work, how do you decide when to use, say, Oculus versus Microsoft HoloLens versus the Meta Glass? What are some of the requirements that you use to decide which augmented reality work you're going to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. Part of it is part of it's pragmatic, what is available at the time. I mean, we've always been sort of this boutique lab where we've got like 2 great everything. You know, like 2 Envis displays, but we couldn't afford 3. You know, 2 Oculus Rifts, 2 whatever. We've also, especially in the first decade of the lab, really prided ourselves on being platform agnostic. We weren't going to only do, you know, IS900 immersive. We weren't only going to do any particular software. And when we first started, sort of the idea of doing cinematic or storytelling pieces, I think we were we probably had the largest immersive install of an IS-900 tracking system in a fine arts context anywhere in the world. There weren't that many stories. There was a lot of industrial application already, and I couldn't have done any of this work without the real incredible generosity of Jay Bolter at Georgia Tech. And they'd been developing, I think the story goes, they had a ton of military money, and then just this incredible generosity and collegiality where money goes from Blair McIntyre's lab to Jay Bolter, working in a literary context, and they start to develop easy-to-use software to lower the buy-in point for people to create and design in augmented reality. And without that code, I never would have started. So the first thing is what is available at the time. And a decade ago, there were very few tools. So we kind of used those tools. Then when we had this sort of precarious relationship to our space, and we didn't want to delay work for a couple of years, we knew that there were very affordable computer vision technologies, but none of them worked as expressive tools. So one of the things we had to do as a lab was build the tools we wanted to see. So we had no comparative advantage, and I never thought of myself as like building any software, but that became a huge focus of the lab, drag and drop, and mostly cinematic. Instead of doing like 3D and like the one spinning teapot, it was all, what do our students have? And they had vast amounts, vast quantities of film. So 2D drag and drop became the big thing. We contacted a computer vision scientist who came on board and worked with us, and we commissioned a custom library, and we had a lot of workshops where within an hour you could be doing augmented reality drag and drop. And for the longest time that was really our go-to, in part for pre-visualizing any product and before we worked on anything else. I was committed to augmented reality rather than VR, which I loved. I mean, I love the idea of like, I feel like I've got a fear of heights right now, where I feel like I'm really flying. But augmented reality to me was always the more kind of the ugly sister that was more theoretically satisfying. Like the idea of the interplay between the physical world and the digital, the way that the physical was co-constituent of the meaning, and like half of the story was so resonant with cinema. I mean, this is your location, but so your thing set in the library becomes libraryness. You can use these. And also I had this kind of allegiance to making like more magical spaces. So while my colleagues were sort of these mimetic recreations in real time and a person in a chair, I was like, let's have a pool of fish. Let's have fire in the ceiling. Let's defy the laws of physics. So for me, I always wanted to have optical see-through display. Not that I've got this huge thing about transparency and technology all the time. I'm all about the glitch thing too. But for me, the idea of optical see-through display was where we were always going. And even now, our most expensive optical see-through displays are still not that great. And the most expensive ones in our lab with the best field of vision are still tethered. So if we have a big experience, there's somebody carrying it around like a flower girl. But we have a lab where it's kind of like you suspend disbelief. You imagine 10 years out, will we still be doing it this way? Like, don't get hung up on the fact that this is horrible and awkward right now. Think of the stories that you're going to be pressed forward. So I guess the answer to that is kind of, I like AR better, but anything that comes along is a tool to think within our lab. So we build things small, we build things big. A lot of the stuff we've done, we like to test it out in the tracking system and then in the Oculus Rift. These might not be an actual product or something that we would exhibit, but you can learn so much through swapping out the technology. And so we do that a fair bit. And then sometimes we figure out, just in one exhibition context, something will work and something won't. These are almost always our plan B.
Yeah, but I think it's so important that you're doing that, because you're helping shaping the future of the technology even.
That's what we like to think. The students is a very cool area, because even the students of mine are like, considered to be like the pioneers in the field. I'm like, that's very cool. There are very few fields where you feel like your students get in like right at the beginning.
Yeah, ours too. But then they go, I'm tired of being a pioneer. It's like, sometimes.
You mentioned that several times during your talk that the Oculus Rift gives users a headache, right? So it's really after 4 minutes and then people get busy.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Was it the first version of Oculus Rift?
Yeah.
It's the newer version.
Yeah, we've got this.
Studies. So did you know about user studies to actually study the effects, side effects of the Oculus Rift? By experience, but are you familiar?
Yeah. No, it's purely anecdotal. I mean, we've got colleagues who are much better positioned to have actually done the studies. And if we wanted to, in the context of our university, there are people where I know I could go to. It becomes so obvious that at this moment it's easier to create large stories in this software because you're not creating in the headset. And that even the second version of the Oculus, so the anecdote I was discussing, it was version 1. There were huge problems with moving this little bit and how your eyes would follow, the mismatch. And they have improved that somewhat, but it's not fully improved. And AR is actually much better for that. I mean, you have better real-world reference, but it will improve, but I didn't really need studies to show me it wasn't working. There were no interlocutors to the work. The only person who would get the 3 interlocking complex stories and the mystery and the murder, and it was only the person who wrote it. Who was going to get that. And I think that's actually been the story of a lot of these emerging technologies, right? I mean, the person who's creating the knowledge domain visualization, or the person who's creating, you know, and then you realize people look at these objects that took a very long time to create. I'm calling them objects just for, but, you know, so long to create, and people spending 3 minutes with them. And that's why I think it's so interesting that, why does it, you know, when people ask, what difference will it make if Metaspace Glass is better? Like, these are all kind of crappy, right? You think, no, the difference could be massive. Yeah. Because if we can create better HCI, a better user experience, then we will have fewer barriers between our imagination and our audiences. And right now, I mean, I didn't need a study to tell me people were going to be sick. That photo was actually poor Catherine Hales, who was like trying desperately to like really be a good soldier through the piece. So I felt very sad.
Okay, when we saw your cell phone with a book, it only works with a book, right? The augmented reality. If I point the cell phone in other places, obviously it won't work. And with only specific pictures, it brings specific things. How did you do that?
Okay.
Did you have the pictures like coded?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's all. And the other thing, too, is I wanted to say that everybody kind of looked at it silently, which was very respectful of everybody else, but it doesn't make sense just as a visual thing. It is an audio piece. But yeah, that's done in Unity, and there's specific things that track well, and then you can tweak the images. The other thing I saw, I hadn't realized that I very rarely use this with the phone. Everyone was too close, so it's not a good experience. Yeah. It actually was designed to be much better. I think for this, it should be like a miniature book and like little stamps. It works better in an exhibition with an iPad out here. But yeah, you can do that in the software, and you bring in, it'll say this will track, the camera will be able to see this, there's enough contrast, and we often use objects instead. This just happened to be a book. But it's an interesting thing because in theory at least, you can create a lot of glitch art. And my student, Helen Papagiannis, who I had the screenshot, she was the one in the Google Glass, did a beautiful project as a graduate student where she took accidental augmented reality. And we had some software going, and then she went and just tried to see whether she could make any of her experiences live on people's shirts or things. So you could have these accidental, and it's really interesting because it wouldn't quite do the thing. It had like these weird dimensions to it, and so you could get glitch art. So I mean,
actually, that would be much better if it's on glasses.
Absolutely. Well, and this is part of the argument that you will never enjoy an experience or sit long with a book like this. Yeah. But again, you just have to say, suspend disbelief. Right. Yeah. This is actually, I like to think these are just suggestive of the future forms, and then we can all have a conversation around what would it take. Yeah.
There's all kinds. There are Google glasses or other glasses that different companies make that you could just.
Oh, we have many. It's just at that point, if I were to be sending around glasses, I couldn't just pass this around, right? At that point, it's a different demo. But yeah, I mean, the ideal demo is easily optical see-through.
Or even a holodeck experience that you actually inside the glasses in a structure building.
We have many of those. So in our lab, we can throw any of our experiences into, our lab tracks about 1,200 square feet, and you could put on the glasses and you could walk through these experiences.
Without even glasses, just walk into this and you have those interaction with holograms, live holograms or anything. I've seen like a video in Dubai that they have like 6D. That actually people interact with.
So then, I mean, the interesting thing is, of course, all of these technologies are kind of at the starting gate, right? And they're all coming, and it's going to be, I forget if it's, 100 billion, 200 billion. At this scale, I can never remember the money. It's going to be a massive industry. And everybody's got their money on a different horse, and everybody's got, and I think the interesting thing for us is what kind of content will there be? What kind of translatable skills do we have? How does cinema fit? How does large-scale literature fit? Where is the novel? Where is HCI? It's not so much I don't know what technology is going to hit, but I do know that we're already working in an environment where we're imagining 10 or 15 years out. So then I think you have to imagine, what do we love? What do we miss? What media, what would persist? And we can imagine stories for whatever's going to work. Like, you can't just work only for HoloLens coming. You can't just work for Meta.
Yeah.
What
It
you
has
have to
to
say
be
is,
together.
what do we like
Right.
in human experiences? How can we look back to like 1960s sound walks? What kind of, you know, how do we know from immersive theater?
They used to have film loops going on.
Yeah,
all the
we just
time.
imagine the form.
You know, today's the 61st anniversary of Dial M for Murder's release. It was Hitchcock's only 3D movie. It is, that clock is slow. It is actually time to conclude and go to lunch, but we have another question, and it doesn't mean, if you're willing, that people have to leave, since it's lunch and not another session. Okay? So you had a question or comment?
I know you were very clear that you're platform agnostic in your...
Well, we used to be. That was our allegiance.
So are there, so all of the software that you mentioned using has been proprietary game engines.
No, but that's just recent. All of our early software we built ourselves.
But is there anything, is there anything competitive at this point that's in the free software world, or is everything somebody's product at this point?
Well, I don't know actually what the pricing models are now for things like Layer, and Dacry just purchased a really important AR library, tracking library that doesn't use natural feature recognition, but would be using tags. It'll be very interesting to see how that falls out, because there are consumer grade, you know, people are teaching classes. I haven't found it satisfactory yet, because the lighting conditions, these are still not great. You know, I had students doing outdoor AR on the cheap using, I forget whether it was Layer or whatever it was. Almost impossible to have a satisfying experience, like beautifully crafted and prototyped, but, you know, a shadow, the wrong time of day, something. But you can definitely use free software, and I watch Dacry to see what happens with their pricing. Unity is just because it works in so many different domains, but it's definitely resulting in a sameness of work. It encourages a particular kind of thinking. So I mean, all of us in this room understand that when you move to a tool like that, it will make you think one way. But the whole
Unity's
history
changed its model too, such that you can actually I mean, it used to be so expensive, and now it's just a licensing. You know, you can actually use it. Essentially free.
For free, but you can't release.
Right, right. But so for the purposes of rapid, I mean, you know, the argument is that, of course.
But for the longest time, we really did focus on that it had to be, like, we had to be able to teach people within an hour. We didn't have, you know, our students were not going to become 3D modelers. They weren't going to be, they were really good storytellers. So we wanted software that was fast, easy to use. And the software that we made that was based on our own wish list was, you know, we had like drag and drop 3D. I mean, it's based on proximity, so you can go louder. We could have collision detection, so you could have like the girl and the farmhouse equals the fire. We weren't able to kind of release these because we ended up in an IP mess. But the stuff that we did was all based on what our students wanted and what they said they needed for stories, and then we worked to make that. And we always had a thing, like if you couldn't do it in a half-day workshop, it wasn't going to be for our lab. So it was a sad moment to change from that, but we also need to be able to get work out. But yeah, we always wanted to not end up in one.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.